my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm gonna cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. Today's episode is in partnership with Needed. The prenatal vitamin industry is failing us, leaving 95% of us depleted during one of the most nutritionally demanding times in our life. There's overwhelming evidence that higher standards of nutrition will improve fertility, birth outcomes, and the trajectory of life. Despite this, most prenatal vitamins only provide bare minimum nutrition. Needed goes way beyond bare minimums with products that can fully meet the needs of our minds, bodies, and babies. Their radically better nutritional system is third-party tested and rigorously developed with the endorsement of over 6,000 women's health experts. In addition to taking their prenatal multivitamin powder and their pre and probiotics, which I've been taking for about a year now, I've also started using their cognitive support supplement, which was designed to help with postpartum brain fog. And I might be 6 years postpartum, but I'm still claiming that brain fog, and it's really helped. I've really been noticing a difference over the last few months. Needed has all of your needs covered from preconception to postpartum and beyond. Needed also simplifies things by bundling core products into easy and flexible monthly plans. You can use the code BIRTHHOUR for 20% off your first order, including their already discounted plans and subscriptions at thisisneeded.com. At the end of this episode, I have a conversation with Stephanie, a Birth Hour listener and Needed customer, and she shares all about the great experience she has had and differences that she's noticed while taking their prenatal vitamins. So stay tuned for that conversation at the end of this episode. Before we get to today's birth story, I want to talk a little bit about our online childbirth course. It's called Know Your Options, and this is the course you've been looking for if you just have that gut feeling that you know you should be taking a childbirth course, but maybe the one that's being offered to you by your care provider is not exactly what you're looking for. It might be more catered towards the type of birth they want you to have versus making you informed of all your different options and how to address different things that happen in birth, because as this podcast has shown us, birth is very unpredictable. So we would love to have you check out our 12-module course. You can go to thebirthhour.com/course to see detailed outlines of what is included in the course. You will also get a bonus course called Beyond the First Latch that is an additional 6 modules all about pumping, feeding your baby, going back to paid work if that's part of your plan. And we have a special coupon code for you. It's 100OFF for $100 off enrollment. Again, that's thebirthhour.com/course. Another great way to be part of the Birth Hour community is by supporting us over on Patreon. So by pledging your support each month at the $5 a month level, you can get access to all of our archived episodes, so over 800 additional episodes not in the main podcast feed, as well as our private Facebook group that has such a great backlog of information. Just using that search bar, you can get almost any question answered, and you're going to find really supportive people there that are going to become your friends. And in addition to that, we do monthly Zoom calls. Just go over to patreon.com/birth hour and become a Patreon member and come see what it's all about. It's just $5 a month. You can get an even bigger discount. If you want to do an annual membership, you'll see that option there. And there's also an option to get it as a gift. So if you have a friend or a mother-in-law or somebody asking you what they can get you to help you prepare for baby, maybe you want a Birth Hour Patreon membership so that you can listen to more and more birth stories and find great community. So again, head over to patreon.com/birth hour to get started with that. Today's birth story guest is Madeline, and she has a hospital birth story to share. It was a really peaceful and positive experience, despite being a long lead up to labor and a long labor as well. She also gets into some of her struggles postpartum with breastfeeding. All right, let's hear from Madeline. Hi, Madeline. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Bren. I'm just so happy to be here. This podcast was such a little happy space for me even before I got pregnant. So thanks for having me.
Oh, good. I love hearing that. And of course. All right. Well, before we get to your story, we'll tell listeners a little bit about you and your family.
Yeah, I'm Madeline. I live in a little town in the Sierra foothills. It's about an hour outside of Sacramento. I live with my husband, Kyle, and our now almost 10-month-old son, Otis. We have chickens, a dog, a cat, and hopefully someday we'll be able to add goats or sheep to our crew.
Mm-hmm.
I work as a labor and delivery nurse, which influenced several parts of my story and choices in pregnancy and birth.
All right. Very cool. Well, why don't you go ahead and start with anything you want to share from getting pregnant, finding out you're pregnant, pregnancy. We'll just start wherever you want to start.
Okay, great. Finding out I was pregnant was so exciting. Kyle and I had been married for about 8 years before we felt ready to start a family. There had been phases where we thought maybe we wanted to be child-free and just travel a bunch or keep moving around every few years. And once we did officially decide that we for certain wanted children, I was in nursing school and then just starting out at my first couple nursing jobs. So that put off trying to conceive even longer. So even though I was really fortunate to get pregnant quickly, getting to the point where I was standing there with a positive pregnancy test felt like a really, really long time coming.
Yeah.
My pregnancy, once I was pregnant, was quite normal. I was pretty sick and very fatigued the first trimester. The only things that helped was laying down as much as possible and drinking a lot of very, very cold lemon water. At one point, my husband actually Googled, can a pregnant person eat too many lemons? Because he was juicing me like 3 a day. The only other sort of noteworthy thing about my pregnancy is my belly never measured along track with what was expected. I was always like at least a couple weeks behind, but it wasn't a big deal. My midwife wasn't concerned. But when I got to I think it was like the 32-week mark, I dropped off my own curve. And then once I hit 36 weeks, my belly hadn't grown at all. And at the time, this was like really stressful for me. I felt like, just normal people, like every day, just someone you see at the grocery store and then also at work, people would comment on how small my stomach was. And I had done a really good job at just like brushing it off. So that moment at like 36 weeks when my midwife was like, okay, I think that you should have an ultrasound just to make sure everything's all right, felt really shocking. I ended up doing the ultrasound and the baby was measuring exactly 50th percentile. And just spoiler alert, he was born at 7 pounds, 4 ounces. So everything was totally normal, but it's only the kind of noteworthy thing. Also, because of my job, I felt like I knew almost too much about all of the potential that could go wrong. So I really tried to protect my mental space and spend time surrounding myself with positive birth stories during my pregnancy. Something I thought about a lot was the mystery of labor and how instead of worrying about all the things that could go wrong, I wanted to see that mystery as an opportunity to embrace that my baby's birth just couldn't be predicted. A tiny part of that was not scanning my belly at work or listening to my baby's heartbeat outside of prenatal appointments. It was definitely tempting to check in on the baby with access to all of these things at my job. But I really wanted to challenge myself to trust that my body and my baby were doing everything that they were supposed to do. In the same sort of mindset to embrace the mystery, we also chose to not find out our baby's sex prenatally. I did try to take good care of my physical self. I ate well. I loved Lily Nichols' Real Food for Pregnancy book. I walked often. I did pregnancy home workouts, and I saw a chiropractor from week 20 on through my pregnancy. I work in a pretty typical hospital setting with OBs, and I knew if I wanted to give birth there, my coworkers would take really good care of me. But I also knew that the hands-off birth I'd pictured for myself just wasn't what we typically see at my hospital. I was so excited to experience labor. I felt curious about what contractions would feel like, and the whole process felt like a rite of passage for me. I wanted to work through birth unmedicated, and my husband was really excited to support me in that. It was such a good bonding experience for us to talk back and forth about the what ifs of our baby's birth, and for him to plan out how he would advocate for me and support me as I labored. So all of that being said, we actually decided to establish care at a hospital a little over an hour away from our house that has midwives and birth tubs and more commonly supports the type of birth that we pictured. I am so glad we made this choice. I love my prenatal care. I actually elected to see the same midwife for all of my appointments. We just really liked her, and I knew I'd likely have a different midwife present at our birth since there were quite a few that rotate on a call schedule. The last part of our care team is we also chose to hire a doula. I knew the data on doulas strongly supports positive birth experience, and I was actually motivated to hire one so that my husband would have someone to support him while he supports me during my labor.
All right. Well, it sounds like you guys did all the things to prepare. So let's go ahead and talk about how labor started for you.
Yeah, my birth story starts a little after my due date. For a week or so, I'd been having what felt like prodromal labor versus Braxton Hicks. It was the classic setup. As soon as the sun went down, I'd have contractions, but by the time it was morning, they were completely gone. Luckily, I could always sleep through it, but it was difficult mentally to get my hopes up nights after night. I've been doing all of the things to nudge labor along. I was eating dates, doing the Nora tea. I think that's nettle, oat straw, red raspberry leaf, and alfalfa. All the ball bouncing, walking, mile circuit, you name it. My midwife had actually even prescribed me to start vaginal evening primrose oil suppositories, as she knew how important it was for me to avoid induction. So I'd even been doing that for a week or so. My 40-week midwife appointment was scheduled for when I was 43, and at that appointment, I decided to get checked for the first time. I was 1.5, 80, -1, and she was able to do a stretch and sweep. This was absolutely not painful. I had heard that it was, so I just want to say here it was not. I did have quite a bit of bloody show after. We left that appointment so hopeful that labor would finally start for real. We went out for coffee, took a long walk around this cute town where all of our appointments were, and then we drove home. As we were getting closer to our house, it dawned on me that the cramping I was feeling had a rhythm. The cramps were coming about every 5 minutes. They weren't painful, but they were crampy for sure. It felt like a period cramp. I decided to tell our doula anyway, just so she was in the loop, that tonight might finally be the night. We continued on with our day like normal. I actually had a chiropractor appointment that I went to, and my husband made me a nice steak dinner. All the while, I kept having these regular, non-painful contractions. After eating, I decided to get in the tub with a ton of Epsom salts just to see if I could make the cramping go away with the warm water and magnesium. They continued on and were coming every 4 to 5 minutes, but they weren't getting any more intense. They still just felt like period cramps. I was so hopeful, but I made myself stay realistic. I just wanted to keep living my normal life and pretend this wasn't happening. So I went downstairs, watched a little bit of Yellowstone with my husband while bouncing and swaying on our birth ball. He rubbed my back, and I could just tell how excited he was that tonight actually might be labor starting. At some point, I noticed the cramps were getting a little more uncomfortable, so I headed to bed around like 9:30. I knew how important it would be to get my rest. Once I got into bed, I quickly found out how uncomfortable laying down was. I think by 11, I was back in the tub. Kyle was sitting in the bathroom with me, timing contractions. We actually use this app called Freya. It has an option to do guided breathing during the contraction, which I really liked at the time. The contractions were starting to feel more uncomfortable. I would have to get in a squat position during them, and it felt really good to close my eyes and breathe so deeply or hum to get through them. After a few hours of this, Kyle made the decision that our doula should head over. My contractions were getting closer together. Sometimes they were even 2 minutes apart, and it felt right to have someone else there to witness what was going on, and I was definitely happy to have extra support there. Our doula, Stephanie, was amazing. She helped us labor at home through the night. We had this little ritual. She'd get me and Kyle set up in some position, say sweet things to me, remind me to breathe, and then she'd just give us space. It was perfect. A happy memory I have from this time is Kyle and I curled up in bed. We had the windows open. I could hear the creek outside rushing, and our local mountain lion was calling. I don't know if you've ever heard a mountain lion call, but
I can't say that I have.
it sounds like a person yelling.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah. So I remember thinking as I'm like curled up with my husband between contractions, and then I pop up into my hands and knees and hum through one while he did counter pressure, how funny it was that me and this mountain lion are both just like yelling into the night. Eventually the sun started rising and talk about leaving for the hospital came up. Actually, it had been coming up for some time. I was just ignoring any talk of it. I really didn't feel ready to leave my house. At this point, my contractions were steadily 3 to 5 minutes apart. They had been for hours. Both my husband and doula felt like things were moving along and it was time to go. I remember trying to explain to them that I was acting too normal between contractions for this to be no active labor. My goal had been to arrive at the hospital at 6 centimeters. I'd seen people in labor at 6 centimeters, and I was not acting like I was that far along.
Yeah.
Yeah, but ultimately, I did make the decision that we should just play it safe and head over. I wore a TENS unit for the drive, and although I couldn't see the clock when we were driving, I could tell my contractions were spacing out. By the time we arrived, I think they were really far apart, like 10 minutes apart. I felt my heart sink all the way into the floor when I was checked into triage, and I was 390-0. If I'm honest, my first thought was embarrassment. I'd been in the shoes of the nurse caring for me, and it felt humbling to be that first-time mom who was just there too early. The bright spot of that visit was the midwives who came in to discharge me home were the sweetest people. One of the midwives was named Lori, and it was actually her first shift in the hospital. She'd previously attended home births, and she just felt like this fairy godmother. She was so sweet and cheery and wise. After a 20-minute NST, I said a small prayer that Lori, the midwife, would somehow still be working when it was finally the right time for us to return and have our baby. We drove the whole hour home. I suggested maybe we get a hotel, but my husband insisted I'd be more comfortable at our house. Our doula actually tried to come home with us, but I really just wanted to be alone. I remember looking over at him when we were driving. It was glaringly bright out. He was drinking this cheap hospital coffee, and I felt so proud to have chosen him as my partner. He was still so upbeat, and we basically stayed up through the night just for somebody to say this was still early labor. I love so much that he continued to build me up as we journeyed back home instead of bracing me for maybe that I couldn't handle an unmedicated labor. Once we got to our house, I made myself eat something and I crawled into our guest bedroom while Kyle took our bed. My contractions started back up again, of course, and I guess the one perk of being exhausted is I could totally fall asleep between them. I had headphones in and I was listening to birth affirmations on repeat. My contractions would wake me up, I'd pop into hands and knees, and then once they'd fade away, I'd lay back down and fall asleep. I wasn't timing anything, so I didn't know if they were getting closer together, and I really liked that. Eventually, I couldn't lay down any longer, so I got in the shower, and then I decided I needed to wake my husband up because it was getting harder and harder to keep my body relaxed during contractions. This whole time, and really my whole labor, each contraction, I would think to myself, how much can I soften? And I'd try to relax my whole body. So it's like the afternoon at this point, and unfortunately, I still felt like really normal between contractions. Once Kyle was awake, I declared to him that we're not leaving for the hospital until I'm in labor land, and I'd never want him to tell me how close my contractions are. Around 6, we decided to bake our baby a birthday cake. I don't remember where I'd heard this idea as a distraction strategy. It might have been your podcast, actually.
I've definitely had a couple people share that on here, yeah. And I thought it was such a cute idea, but I never had a labor where I was in a state of mind to bake a cake. So I love it.
I guess the one perk of a long labor is you can do something like this.
Yeah.
We'd made sure during the end of my pregnancy to have all the ingredients stocked for this amazing carrot cake that my family makes. And something about that cake, maybe it was doing something I do so often, like baking, or that it was nighttime again, but my contractions definitely picked up during this time. At one point during the cake making, I couldn't stop smiling, even though the contractions were really starting to hurt because I knew it was finally real. I abandoned Kyle to take the cakes out of the oven on his own while I swayed on my birth ball. My legs felt shaky and I had so much pressure in my pelvis during a contraction. The ball really helped me feel supported. It was like something was pushing against all of that pressure. Around 11, I got in bed again, hoping to sleep between contractions. This only lasted an hour or so. I was still doing the thing where I'd pop into all fours during a contraction, but I needed Kyle to do counter pressure during them. And it was getting too tiring to have to wake him up with enough time to get counter pressuring before the peak of a contraction. So I decided to labor on the toilet. This was a suggestion from our doula. Kyle had been texting her during all of this, during the whole day, keeping her in the loop. I love now that I have timestamps and that she supported us even virtually. I still just wanted to labor with me and Kyle. I think the prior evening of bringing her too early was just a mistake I wasn't willing to make again. The toilet made things really intense. I was so shaky and jittery the whole time I was on it. It kind of freaked me out a little bit. So I decided to get in the tub instead. And this is my favorite part of my labor. All of the lights were off. There was a little salt lamp that we had plugged in. I had my birth affirmations playing, and Kyle was sitting in the bathroom with me, petting my hair and rubbing my arms. Between contractions, I actually kept tearing up because I just felt so grateful and overjoyed. Our baby was moving so much in my belly, and I just felt so connected to my husband and so grateful to be laboring peacefully in my own home. After about an hour in the tub, my demeanor totally shifted, and I wasn't feeling up to joking between contractions. This is when Kyle made the decision to call the nurse line at our hospital to get them to convince me to leave the house. In the background, when he was on the phone, the nurse heard me vocalizing and said something like, "Yeah, come right in." So Kyle was really excited, hung up the phone, came back into the bathroom and was like, "Okay, it's time to go." To which I replied, "No, I'm not leaving yet." I was really determined to be at least 6 centimeters when we arrived, and I was very not ready to leave my house. I felt a lot of dread about doing the car ride again. So Kyle came up with a compromise to at least have our doula come over, to which I agreed. I got out of the tub in anticipation for her arrival. And so I was like walking around the house, kind of getting ready. And I had a few back-to-back really intense contractions. Kyle texted our doula. This is a direct quote. "Mads is freaking out a bit," which makes me laugh to think about. It certainly felt like something had shifted. Suddenly, I no longer wanted to wait at our house. I knew I needed to be where we planned to give birth. So I'm standing outside, mentally preparing myself to get in the car. And this little owl we see a lot was hooting. And I was standing there staring up at this huge, nearly full red moon. It was so low. I could literally see all of the craters on the surface. Kyle and Stephanie are talking on the phone, making a plan that she's going to reroute and meet us midway through the drive so she can give me the TENS unit again. It was so helpful during the first car ride. I didn't want to do another hour in the car without it. We all got to the hospital together around 4 a.m. This time, they didn't put me in triage. They put me in a huge labor room with a tub. And the nurse who took care of me was quite literally the exact person I needed at that moment. Her name was Sarah, and I think Kyle and I will remember her and her kindness forever. She took a 20-minute NST while I was draped over the bed. The back of the bed was raised all the way up, and I was facing it. So I was like straddling a chair, but my legs were just on the bed behind me. Nobody asked me to put on a hospital gown. I just stayed in my own clothes. And as soon as the 20 minutes were up, she took the monitors off and brought the midwives in. I knew the universe was giving me a gift because you're not going to believe who was working. It was Lori.
Oh, yay.
The same midwife from before. So exciting. I asked her to check me right away, and she was elated because I was 600 and 0 station. So it was official. We were finally going to meet our baby. It was March 22nd, and everything felt like it was working out. The nurse asked me if she could place an IV. I had tested positive for GBS during my pregnancy, and I wanted to get antibiotics. Once that was done, me, Kyle, and my IV pole all got in the shower together. We had this ritual where between contractions, Kyle would hold the shower head over my back. And then as soon as a contraction would start, he'd shove it into his armpit so the water was still running over my back, but he had both hands to do counter pressure. We did this for what felt like an hour. The nurse would come in every once in a while with a handheld Doppler to listen to the baby. All was well, but I was really surprised that she didn't comment on how hot the water was. It's funny reflecting on this because I know now after talking over our birth with my husband that the water was like barely lukewarm. And I'm glad he didn't break it to me in the moment because I probably would have weirded me out that my sensations are so off. Labor is just so weird.
Yeah, I haven't heard that before. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely your body temperature changes quickly. So
yeah, it's so strange. Eventually, my legs were shaking so much, I needed to lie down. Sarah, the nurse, wrapped me in warm blankets and held my hand as she led me to the bed. She turned all the lights off in the room and had those little flameless candles everywhere. I felt so cared for. At this point, our doula suggested I try to rest between contractions and use the TENS unit again. Her and Sarah helped me into a cocoon of warm blankets on the bed and put the TENS unit sticker back on my back. My antibiotics dose was done, so I wasn't hooked up to anything. I put in my headphones, got as comfortable as I could on my side, and had the TENS unit on the lowest setting. Once a contraction would start up, I'd move to my hands and knees, and then I would ramp the TENS unit up to its max setting, and the doula would do counter pressure. I was definitely vocalizing at this point during contractions. It was like everything inside of me was so intense, it would just bubble up through my mouth. We did this routine for like another hour or something until I had a contraction that was so intense. It just felt really different and powerful. I took out an earbud, looked at my doula and whispered, "Wow." She asked me if that one felt different. All I could do was nod in reply before dozing off, and then I was woken up by another wow-worthy contraction. It felt like it wasn't working for me anymore to sleep between contractions. I felt like I couldn't prepare myself enough for how intense they were getting. So I needed to be checked just to decide what to do next. Lori, the midwife, came in, and I think I actually cheered out loud when she said I was 8 centimeters and the baby was at +1 station. She commented on how shocked she was that the baby was so low in my pelvis and asked if we could get the birth tub filled up. Shift change had happened for the nurses, but thankfully Lori, the midwife, was going to stay until my baby was born. The new nurse was still midway through filling the tub, and I couldn't wait any longer, so I climbed in. The warm water was instant relief. It felt like it was holding me up. Our doula and my husband and I ended up making this new little ritual. During a contraction, I would swim, or I guess really just kind of scoot over to the edge of the tub where they were, and one of them would do counter pressure, while the other would be in my face with helping me breathe or touching my hair and just telling me that I was doing a good job. Then the contraction would end, and I'd swim into the center of the pool. And I don't really know how to explain this other than I would have visual and auditory hallucinations. I realized that probably sounds totally wild and maybe scary, but it felt really peaceful. I heard birds chirping and singing, and I saw strawberry ice cream being scooped in slow motion. It was like
What?
It was like I could reach out and touch the bits of strawberry.
Wow. That's a new one too.
My husband says it looks like I was just relaxing or sleeping in the middle of the tub, but it's not what it was like for me.
Oh my gosh.
This went on for like another hour or so until my doula made eye contact with me and asked me what felt like the strangest question. She said, "Honey, are you pushing?" I actually laughed a little in response. It felt like my labor was just starting to get difficult and there was no way it was going to be time to push. It hurt my feelings a little bit, actually, because in my mind, I was midway through a marathon and she was just randomly bringing up the finish line. I didn't have the words to explain any of this beyond shaking my head no. And a few contractions later, I heard somebody grunting, and it finally registers for me that someone's me. I was so deep in labor, I didn't even realize I was the person making the so obvious pushing sounds. So we had the midwives come back in. Lori and her support midwife float into the room, and I whispered out to them, "I think I'm pushing," to which their reply was, "Oh, lovely." Nobody was rushing around or turning the lights on or wheeling in a sterile cart. It felt totally strange to me, so I mustered out to them, "Can someone tell me that everything's normal?" And Lori looks at me and my husband, and we still laugh about this. She says, "It looks to me like someone's trying to have a baby." She was just so trusting in my body and my ability to birth my baby.
I like that.
Yeah, truly. She was the midwife we'd been praying for our whole pregnancy. I asked if she could just check my cervix to tell me it was in fact safe to push, and she said that it was. The next contraction came, and I finally gave in to that sensation I was feeling. I let my body push, and pop, my bag of waters broke. Someone shined a little flashlight in the water to show it was clear. I pushed about 3 more times, and my husband and the 2 midwives were positioned behind me. It had been my husband's dream to catch the baby and announce if it was a boy or a girl. All the lights were off, and flameless candles were flickering at the edges of the room. I felt so safe. I was in awe of how intense this was getting, but I didn't feel afraid. My nurse was in front of me. I'm on my hands and knees, and she held my hands and looked into my eyes and told me I was doing so well. At one point, I reached down and I felt the baby's hair. It was so bizarre to feel their little head and know they were about to be separate from me, their own little person. My 4th push was so intense. I remember thinking, this is all I have to give. It felt like I was reaching into the depths of my soul. The sensation I was experiencing felt like somebody was stretching my perineum. I'd seen that happen at deliveries before, and it felt so shocking that the midwife would be doing that to me. I actually cried out, "You're hurting me." And midwife replied, "No one's touching you, dear." The sensation, it went away quickly when the contraction ended, and I could hear my husband and the midwives whispering. Labor is such a trip because in my memory, they're like 10 feet away, but they're really just at my feet, and I could barely make out their words, but I heard someone say something about lips. And then it dawned on me that they were talking about our baby's lips. So shock just totally washes over me. I was like, is the baby's head born? I couldn't believe it because the energy in the room, it was still so serene. And nobody had yelled out that the baby's head was born, and everyone was just calmly standing there watching me birth my baby. I panicked a little bit in this moment. And I said something like, "I don't have a contraction," or "I don't know how to push." And the midwife was just like, well, we'll wait then. So at my next breath, and just 23 minutes after I started pushing, my baby was born into my husband's hands. He passed our baby between my legs underwater, and I pulled him up onto my chest, and it felt like time slowed. Our baby was finally here. Kyle wrapped his arms around us, and somebody handed me a baby blanket. Everybody just stood back and let us dry off our baby. We announced he was a boy, and we were talking to him. He was so calm and alert, just gazing between us and wiggling around. I looked around the room, and everyone was just standing there, like as if they were trained to just watch and let us be. It's such a tiny thing to reflect back on, but when I think about my birth, it feels so profound. It felt like they all had so much trust in us. Overall, my whole birthing experience, honestly, it's so obvious everybody caring for us just had so much faith in my ability to birth my baby and in my baby's ability to be born. That's it.
That's amazing. I love it. I love all the little details that you remember as well.
Seriously, the best day.
I can definitely relate to that, like pushing and being like, stop what you're doing. And the midwife's like, that's all you.
It's crazy. I guess that's the Ring of Fire.
Yeah. I feel like that was my third birth that I said that. Yeah. So you don't learn. Okay. And what about postpartum for you?
Immediately postpartum was completely euphoric. I couldn't stop laughing. I was just so happy my baby was safe and was finally here. I felt so proud of myself that I'd done it. I had had an unmedicated birth. After like 10 minutes or so, Otis's cord stopped pulsing. So we cut it. I handed the baby to my husband while I walked from the birth tub to the bed to birth the placenta. In that little moment where Kyle was holding our son for the first time, I looked back at them, and Kyle was just gazing at him with tears in his eyes and says, "What kind of man are you going to be?" I think that memory is just imprinted in my heart forever.
That's so sweet.
Next, the midwives wanted to assess if I'd torn. And this is where the atmosphere of the room really shifted. The super bright spotlights went on. My feet were against the paddles in the bed, and I was kind of cold and like jumpy from adrenaline. I felt so exposed and vulnerable. Otis was back on my chest, and my husband and my doula were right by me talking to me. And even the midwives did a good job at explaining my second-degree tear and how the repair was going, but I still felt really freaked out. The repair process was only 10 minutes long, but it felt like a really long time. If I'm lucky enough to have another baby, I really hope to have somebody ready to coach me through pushing more slowly so I can avoid tearing again, or at least make a plan to adjust the energy of the room so I can cope better during the repair. Something worth noting is they didn't even give me postpartum Pitocin. They just said I didn't need it because my bleeding was so minimal. It was really cool to see how different this hospital's policies were in comparison to what I'm used to.
Yeah.
Otis latched right away during my repair, and he was and still is a very eager nurser. Unfortunately, his latch was pretty shallow, and he preferred to keep his lips curled in, so it would take quite a bit of adjusting to get a latch that wasn't painful. He'd been assessed for ties while we were still in the hospital by a pediatrician, multiple midwives, every nurse and lactation consultant that could come in. I kept asking everybody who would come in for their opinion because I just felt like something was wrong. Everybody was really reassured that I had so much visible colostrum, and we ended up going home just one day postpartum. When we were discharged, I had already started developing a blood blister on one of my nipples, but everybody just said we'd figure it out and things were going to be fine. Unfortunately, things got harder at home. My milk came in the next day, and Otis would gag and choke while he was drinking. Sometimes he'd even get really sweaty and fidgety at the breast. It just felt like he was overwhelmed and working so hard. And because it was the weekend, I couldn't find immediate lactation help. Actually, out of desperation, a friend of mine had her friend, who I hadn't even met before, come over and help me with latching. So sweet. By the time we saw an IBCLC at our peds appointment, a few days later, I was already having a lot of nipple pain, and Otis was getting more than average at weighted feeds. And since he didn't have any ties and his latch could be adjusted to get his lips more flanged out, they basically just told me that my worries were just first-time mom worries and that breastfeeding sometimes hurts for people. And I just felt really dismissed, if I'm honest. And I think because I left my birth with so much confidence in myself and my intuition and my strength, I kept seeking out support. I continued seeing lactation counselors, and I continued to be kind of written off because my baby was getting enough milk. It was like no one could get over that my baby was gaining weight, so they just acted like there couldn't be a breastfeeding issue. Eventually, at my 4-week postpartum visit, my midwife was shocked. My nipple damage was so bad. My left nipple was so cracked, it looked like a slice of pie had been taken out of it. She watched me and my baby nurse and immediately was like, "Oh, you have strong milk ejection reflex," which I think most people call a fast letdown.
Yeah.
And you probably have an oversupply. So your baby's latching really tentatively or shallow because he's basically drinking out of a fire hose. I'd never heard of this. And I've taken breastfeeding classes for my job. So I think that was another moment where I just felt really humbled by, even if you know things, in a cerebral way.
So she actually, the same midwife, had experienced the same combination of issues, the fast letdown and oversupply. So she was able to help me with more laid back breastfeeding positions, which was really helpful. She also suggested that I go to a breastfeeding support group. When I was pregnant, my mom had mentioned how much she loved La Leche meetings when she was breastfeeding. And I decided to do my research and find a local chapter, and their next available meeting was the following week. So I went, and everybody there was so supportive. It was a total game changer postpartum. A mom there suggested that we try the flipple technique. I'm sure somebody has mentioned it on this podcast before, but you basically flip your nipple up towards the ceiling before the baby latches so that they're forced to get a deeper latch. That combined with laying back and side-lying nursing gave my nipples a break, and I was completely healed by week 6 postpartum. The silverettes were what I was living for in that time period. And once I could finally let those go, I was like, I get why people breastfeed. This is so special. And it's worth noting that Otis and I are still breastfeeding now at 10 months postpartum. And even though it was hard to get where we're at, it's totally worth it.
Yeah, that's amazing that you guys got through that hard patch.
Yeah. Another thing that came out of that postpartum appointment was a referral for pelvic floor physical therapy. This was a total help in getting my body feeling stable again. It was a really big help.
All right. Well, do you have any resources you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to share the link for the doula group that I used. They're local to the greater Sacramento area. Of course, La Leche League, pelvic floor physical therapy. I included my physical therapist link there just in case. It's kind of hard to find somebody in postpartum.
Yes. And figure out insurance if that's a referral situation and all of that.
Right, for sure. The Birth Partner is a book that my husband read, and it sparked so many great conversations. I really liked in there, they have this scale of how much you want or don't want all different kind of interventions. And I just felt like it was really helpful to be able to for something about his brain and my brain that worked really well. The Ina May's Guide to Childbirth, of course, everybody recommends that. I also included a book called How to Grow a Baby. It's written by this woman named Amy Hammer, who's actually a nurse practitioner. And it's more of a pregnancy preconception book, but it has really beautiful art and describes all the different phases of your menstrual cycle. And then a link to that Freya contraction timer too. And of course, the birth hour. I said that surrounding myself with positive birth stories was one of the ways I mentally prepared myself for labor. And this podcast was just such an easy way to filter through, making sure I could listen to ones that were going to have a happy ending and just fill my brain with all of the good things.
Oh, good. All right. Well, thank you for those. There's a couple new ones in there to me. So we'll get those links up. And then what's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, my Instagram would probably be the best. It's private, but I'm happy to chat with anybody who wants to talk about any of the things that I talked about. My Instagram handle is my first name, Madeline, and then my last name. But instead of Howard with an O, it's with a 0.
All right. Well, thank you so much again for sharing.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. All right. Now I'm going to talk to Stephanie about her experience taking Needed's prenatal vitamins. And remember, you can use that coupon code BIRTHHOUR for 20% off your order at thisisneeded.com. I will link to that directly in the podcast app where you're listening to this episode, as well as on the show notes. And the link actually automatically applies that discount as well. All right. Let's hear from Stephanie. Hi, Stephanie. Thank you so much for coming on the Birth Hour to chat with me about Needed.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about my experience with it.
Yeah, I was really happy to hear you'd had a good experience in our Patreon Facebook group, and I'm glad you're up for having this conversation. Before we get into that, will you tell listeners just kind of a little bit about who you are, what stage of life you're in, that sort of thing?
Sure. My name is Stephanie, and I live with my husband, Jamie, and I have a 10-year-old adoptive daughter and a 20-month-old son, and I'm expecting baby number 2 with my husband, and I'm currently 28 weeks pregnant with this one.
Oh, so fun. All right. So, yeah, how did you first learn about Needed, and when did you start using their products? And then we can talk about which products you've been using.
I first heard about it on your podcast, actually. And I heard it in my first pregnancy, but I didn't start using it until I was postpartum and breastfeeding with my son. I started using it about 3 months postpartum with him.
Okay. And which products did you start using?
I started with the powder, the prenatal multivitamin powder.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a vanilla flavor, so I thought, well, it will help me stay regimented with maybe a smoothie in the morning because I was trying to lose some weight postpartum too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got that, and it actually tastes really good.
Yeah, it's pretty subtle. It's not like a fake vanilla.
Yeah, it is. It is. But of course, I add a lot of other things to it, like, peanut butter and banana.
You gotta make it delicious.
But yeah, it tastes really good. My milk supply was like really great with breastfeeding my son. I don't know exactly if it had to do with that or not, but I did nothing else, and it was fantastic milk supply. Actually, I'm still taking the prenatals, but I'm now switched to the pills, and they have a little flavoring in the capsules. It's a citrus flavor.
Yeah, I think they have the option to get it without that or with it, because I have the ones without it, but now I'm curious about the citrus.
Yeah, you know what? I have the citrus. That's what they sent me, and what I like, I'm on the 9-month subscription plan with them. And what I like is they send it 3 months each. They don't send all 9 months to you right off the bat. So for the first 3 months, I got the citrus, and they actually reached out to me and asked for the next 3 months if I would prefer citrus or no flavoring. So I really appreciated that, and I chose no flavoring for the next one. So we'll see what that's like. But I'm still nursing my son, and I'm pregnant with this one. No supply and no drop in my supply at all, which was shocking to me because I've heard from a lot of women that they had a decrease in their milk supply becoming pregnant. So, and then, I didn't take these when I was pregnant with my son, but then pregnant with this one. What I've noticed, and I really think it has to do with the Needed prenatal multivitamins, is I have far less swelling, if at all, sometimes. And I started swelling with my son early on, like when I was pregnant with him, about 10 weeks in, maybe sooner. And this one, I just started getting some swelling when it's a long day about 2 weeks ago. So big difference in the swelling. So it works.
That's interesting. Well, I'm glad that you're feeling good this time and you haven't had those issues. Anything that supports you and feeling your best throughout pregnancy is great. Did you notice any difference, like when you started taking Needed versus, I assume you were taking some other prenatal vitamin before that?
Yes, I was. Yes, energy level. Big time.
Okay.
It definitely an increase in the energy level. And of course, I chalked that up to needed prenatals as well. Because it was just night and day from when I started adding that powder when I first started into the smoothie to what I was taking before. And, you know, the prenatals I took before needed, they were supposed to be really good and they had the methylfolate, not the folic acid, but really a night and day difference with these. I definitely noticed.
Yeah, I think, we've talked about in that the past conversations with the founders of Needed how quantity wise a lot of prenatals just don't have enough of the vitamins, and that's why they did the powder so that you could get these scoops full of vitamins into you every day, and then if you get the capsules, you're taking 8 of them, but that's what you need which is where their name came from, to get everything that you need during pregnancy.
Exactly. And the powder I thought would be more palatable than the 8 capsules. But once I started on the capsules, I started those pretty early on in this pregnancy, and I had some morning sickness, and they did not make me sick.
That's great.
I stopped with the powder because I just couldn't stomach smoothies early on in my pregnancy. So I thought I need to get my vitamins in. So I switched to the capsules, and they did not make me sick. I had no nausea, no upset. I've even taken them, of course, when you have morning sickness, you don't always eat full meals,
Right.
and I've taken them on an empty stomach and no sickness with them whatsoever.
Yeah, I definitely think it's nice to have both options because you don't want to skip your prenatals for the day because you didn't have time to mix the powder into something. I mix it into oatmeal a lot, and that is a great way for me to get it in because for me, I had a smoothie every day of my pregnancies, and I am just not, it kind of ruins smoothies for me.
Yeah.
So I'll have one every now and then, but I think just the process of it, it's oh, I did that every day for 9 months, 3 times. So I'm all about finding other ways to get it in as well. But I do like having the capsules as an option as well for the days when I'm, just don't have the time or, with nausea or whatever it is you
Absolutely
need to do. But yeah, I'm glad that those haven't had any issues for you. And I'm excited. Before we started recording, you said you were getting the omega-3s soon. I'm excited for you to try that because I have never been able to take an omega-3 that doesn't give me the worst fishy burps. And the ones
here.
from Needed have been totally fine.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that.
Yes, you'll have to report back in the Facebook group. But yeah, it's wild because I know it's the same, a lot of the same ingredients and stuff, but whatever they did, no fishy burps, which is much appreciated.
Absolutely. Wow. I'm excited to try now because, I was, I'm on, you're just nervous because I've never tried one that hasn't had that effect. So
yeah,
I am definitely excited to see if they don't bother me that way. But
yeah, and it's a big dose for those too. I think it's 4 capsules a day and they're big. So they really want you to get all the nutrients that are recommended and make sure that you do with the doses that they recommend. So, well, yeah, I'm really glad that it's been working out for you and that you discovered them through the birth hour. It's always great to hear when people find one of the sponsors to be really beneficial in their lives. So thanks for chatting with me about it.
Sure. Oh, I also wanted to throw in too with Needed, just their customer support is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Because I bought the 9-month supply and I only got 3 months supply, and I emailed them through their customer service. They had some multiple ways to contact them, and they got back with me in less than 24 hours and explained the whole process of how they just split it up in 3-month segments and everything like that. So fantastic customer service.
Yeah, because they want you to have the freshest products sent to you, not have to store it all for 9 months, I'm sure.
Right.
That's awesome. I love hearing that. Everyone I have worked with over there has been amazing. So I'm not surprised to hear that at all, but it's great to hear too.
Yeah.
All right, Stephanie. Well, thank you so much again for chatting with me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much again to Madeline for sharing her story with us. You can find her show notes page by going to thebirthhour.com and just searching for her name in the search bar. And make sure you use that coupon code BIRTHHOUR if you're checking out Needed's products. I recommend using it on the bundles. The code works for your first order only. So if you use it on a bundle and you get the 9-month supply or something like that, like Stephanie did, then it's actually a 40% off discount. So again, that's BirthHour at thisisneeded.com. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.